In the quiet town of Brandon, Florida, Tavrin Kael makes a choice that will change everything. He hands over his meal to two firefighters rushing to a dangerous blaze, an act of kindness that unknowingly fuels a life-saving rescue. But what drives Tavrin to do this? What does it mean to follow in the footsteps of a parent lost to the flames? In this story, we witness how one small gesture sparks a chain of events that will touch lives in ways no one could predict. Keep watching to see how this simple act becomes a powerful tribute to courage and love. Don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories. The evening unfurled over Brandon, Florida, like a slow sigh, the sun dipping low to cast a golden sheen across the suburban sprawl, its rays glinting off the cracked asphalt of a parking lot nestled beside a modest fast food restaurant. The sky bled hues of crimson and amber, painting the horizon in a quiet promise of dusk, while the air carried the faint hum of traffic and the distant chirp of crickets stirring in the warm breeze. Inside the restaurant, the atmosphere thrummed with life. The sizzle of grills hissed in rhythm with the clatter of trays, the murmur of voices weaving a tapestry of mundane chatter, and the sharp tang of frying oil mingling with the sweet scent of toasted buns. Tavrin Kael stood near the back of the line, his wiry frame slouched slightly from a day spent weaving through traffic as a delivery driver, his dark hair tucked haphazardly under a faded cap, his brown eyes drifting over the glowing menu board with a quiet, almost meditative focus. At 28, he was a man of simple routines, his life a steady cadence of drop-offs and pickups. But beneath the surface ran a current of something deeper, a legacy etched in memory, a father lost to the unforgiving jaws of fire when Tavrin was just a boy, leaving behind a void filled only by stories and a burning sense of duty. Ahead of him, two firefighters stood in the queue, their presence a stark contrast to the casual bustle around them. Their uniforms hung heavy with the dust of ash and the weight of exhaustion, the fabric streaked with soot that told tales of battles fought in the heat of the day. Drenvar Holt, broad-shouldered and barrel-chested, shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his gruff voice rumbling low as he rubbed a hand across his stubbled jaw. "Need food. Can't keep running on fumes like this." His partner, Lysara Vane, stood beside him, her lean frame taut with a coiled energy, her sharp gray eyes scanning the room as she brushed a stray curl from her forehead, her dark hair spilling loose from a ponytail she'd tucked under her helmet earlier. She set the helmet on the counter with a soft clink, her voice a tired murmur. "Long shift. Thought we'd get a break by now." Tavrin watched them, his gaze lingering on the way their shoulders sagged, the way their hands twitched with restless fatigue, a mirror to the weariness he'd seen in his father's frame, etched into the stories his mother, Mara, still shared over late-night tea. Your dad'd stumble in, scarf down a sandwich, then head right back out. Never stopped, not once. The line shuffled forward, a slow crawl of hungry patrons, and Tavrin's thoughts drifted. His father's boots by the door, the creak of the floorboards as he'd pace, the quick meals snatched between calls, always ready to run into the dark. He'd been a firefighter, a man of iron will and gentle hands, until a warehouse fire swallowed him whole, leaving Tavrin with nothing but a faded jacket and an ache that never dulled. Mara had raised him alone after that, her hands roughened by years of gardening and odd jobs, her quiet strength a lifeline through his grief. Tavrin carried that strength now, a silent inheritance, and as he watched Drenvar and Lysara, it stirred. A pang of recognition, a pull he couldn't name. The counter loomed closer, the firefighters just steps from ordering, when a shrill siren tore through the restaurant's hum, a jagged, piercing wail that erupted from their fire truck parked outside, its red hull a hulking shadow under the streetlights. The sound sliced the air, sharp and urgent, and the room fell into a stunned hush, heads swiveling toward the windows, eyes wide with the sudden shift. Drenvar's shoulders stiffened, a curse slipping from his lips. Hell. Now? Right now? While Lysara's hand shot to her helmet, her sharp gray eyes narrowing as she tilted her head. Close. Too close. Sounds bad. They spun as one, their boots thudding against the tiled floor, a crackle of urgency sparking around them like static, their exhaustion eclipsed by instinct as they moved toward the door. Tavrin's heart lurched, the siren a jolt that yanked him from memory into the present. Fire. Danger. The call that had stolen his father's last breath. He didn't think. His body moved before his mind caught up, a reflex born from years of living in that shadow. Stepping out of line, he darted toward the counter, where a tray sat waiting, 2 steaming burgers and a heap of fries freshly handed over to a couple who'd just paid. "Hold up!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the hum, sharp and raw as he intercepted the firefighters mid-stride. His hands snatched the tray, trembling slightly as he thrust it toward Drenvar and Lysara. "Take this. You need it more." His breath came quick, his eyes locking with theirs. "Go, please, go." Drenvar blinked, his gruff facade cracking for a split second, surprise flickering across his weathered face. "Kid, you serious?" But Lysara acted faster, her sharp gray eyes meeting Tavrin's with a flash of gratitude as she grabbed the tray. "Thanks. Owe you one." Her voice was clipped, urgent, and they bolted out, the siren swallowing their heavy footsteps, the tray clutched tight in Lysara's hands as they leapt into the truck. The engine roared to life, lights flaring red and white against the dusk, and the vehicle peeled out, disappearing into the night with a wail that lingered in the air like a ghost. Tavrin exhaled, a shaky breath escaping as the restaurant buzzed back to life, the chatter resuming in a tentative swell. He turned, his pulse still racing, and faced the couple, a young pair, their expressions soft with a mix of surprise and warmth. Elias Warwick, tall with a mop of curly hair that fell into his eyes, stood beside Leora Warwick, petite, with warm hazel eyes that glinted in the overhead light. They were empty-handed now, their meal speeding toward a fire they'd never see. Elias rubbed the back of his neck, his voice low. "You didn't have to do that. Really." Tavrin waved him off, his grin tight, almost sheepish. "They're out there. My dad was one of them. Had to. Couldn't not." Leora's smile was gentle, her hand brushing Elias's. "That's good of you. Really good. We'll reorder. No trouble." They stepped back into line, their hands linked, their quiet resolve a mirror to the impulse that had driven Tavrin forward. Behind the counter, Zephyr Kane watched, his lean frame still as he manned the grill, his graying hair tied back in a loose knot, his dark eyes narrowing with a flicker of something raw. The manager, a man whose life had been brushed by fire's cruel hand, friends lost to its wrath over the years, saw more than a simple gesture. Tavrin's quick hands, the couple's calm nod, the firefighter's rush. It struck a chord, a memory of late nights waiting for his father's crew, of meals shared before a call that never came back. He flipped a burger, his movements mechanical, but his chest tightened, a spark igniting. He'd seen the boy's heart, and it echoed something he couldn't let fade. His gaze flicked to Elias and Leora, their patience a quiet strength, and he muttered under his breath, "Good souls. Damn good." Tavrin rejoined the line, his cap low over his eyes, his pulse steadying, not from nerves, but from a quiet echo of his father's spirit, a moment where he'd stepped into those boots. Elias and Leora glanced back, their smiles faint but genuine. "You're solid. Thanks for that," Elias said, and Leora added, "Means something. Really does." Tavrin shrugged, his voice soft. Just did what he would've. Felt right. The restaurant hummed, the siren's wail a fading thread, and Tavrin didn't know, none of them did, that the tray he'd given was racing toward a desperate fight, a spark of kindness weaving its way through the night, a lifeline for lives he'd never meet. At home, Mara waited, her hands sorting through a basket of laundry, her graying hair catching the soft glow of a lamp. "Late shift again?" Tavrin shed his cap, grinning faintly as he sank into a chair. "Yeah. Gave my food to firefighters. Siren called him out. Felt right." Her eyes glistened, a towel pausing in her hands. "Like your dad. Always gave. Never thought twice." She set the laundry aside, her voice a balm. "You're him, Tav." Steady as he was, heart and all. He nodded, the act settling into him like a stone dropped into still water, ripples he couldn't see but felt deep. The kitchen warmed with their quiet, the laundry piled high, and he didn't know. The fire burned. Drenvar and Lysara fought, the meal a lifeline. Only that he'd done something small, something his father would have nodded at, a spark that glowed in the dark. The night stretched on, the siren a memory fading into the hum of crickets, and Tavrin sat, the kitchen still, the act alight. Unaware, an hour ticked by. A manager moved, a surprise brewed, a kindness born in haste, unbroken, alive. The night draped Brandon, Florida, in a heavy stillness. The stars, faint glimmers, struggling through a veil of thinning clouds, their light barely touching the quiet streets below where the hum of distant traffic faded into a soft murmur. The air carried a faint tang of smoke, a lingering whisper of chaos that drifted from the town's edge, curling through the open windows of Tavrin Kael's modest bungalow like an uninvited guest. Inside, the kitchen glowed with a soft warmth, the single bulb above the table casting a gentle pool of light across the worn linoleum floor, illuminating the stacks of folded laundry that Mara Thalor had left scattered in neat piles. Tavrin sat at the table, his faded cap slung over the back of a creaky wooden chair, his dark hair mussed from running his hands through it, his brown eyes tracing the faint steam rising from a bowl of soup that had long since cooled. At 28, he was a delivery driver whose days blurred into a rhythm of packages and routes, a life of quiet repetition that rarely stirred the surface of his steady existence. But tonight was different. Beneath his calm exterior, a flicker of something stirred, a quiet pride that had taken root when he'd handed his meal to the firefighters, a spark that reached back to the father whose memory was woven into every corner of this house. A man lost to fire's relentless hunger years ago. Mara moved through the kitchen with a familiar ease, her hands roughened by years of tending the small garden out back, her graying hair catching the light as she rinsed a pot in the sink, the clink of metal against porcelain, a soft counterpoint to the night's hush. She glanced over her shoulder, her voice a gentle thread. "You're quiet, Tav. Still thinking about them?" He nodded, his fingers tightening around the spoon he'd been toying with, his voice low and measured. "Yeah, wonder if they're okay out there. That siren, it sounded close, Ma. Hope they ate, hope it helped them keep going." She turned off the faucet, drying her hands on a faded towel as she crossed to the table, her eyes softening with a warmth that carried years of shared loss. "It did. You gave him something, Tav. Your dad. He'd come in after a call, grab whatever I'd cooked, and head right back out. Never stopped to think about himself. That's you tonight, steady as he was, heart and all." She sat across from him, folding her arms on the table, her gaze steady. "You've got his fire, you know. Quiet, but it's there." Tavrin's throat tightened, the spoon slipping from his fingers to clatter softly against the bowl, his mind drifting to the image of his father, tall and broad, his boots heavy on the floorboards, his quick grin flashing before he'd dash out into the night. The memory was sharp, vivid, a plate of cold leftovers, a hurried kiss on Mara's cheek, the slam of the door as he answered another call, the last one he'd never returned from. Tavrin had been 9, too young to understand the finality of that night, but old enough to feel the hole it left, a wound Mara had stitched together with her quiet strength and endless stories. He looked at her now, her hands still, her eyes glistening with a pride that mirrored his own. "Hope so, Ma. Felt right, giving it to him. Like he was there, telling me to move." She reached across, her rough fingers brushing his. "He was, always is, in you." Beyond the bungalow's walls, the night burned, a fierce, unforgiving fire raging through a small house on the outskirts of Brandon, its orange tongues clawing at the wooden frame, smoke billowing thick and black into the sky like a shroud. The fire truck tore through the streets, its siren a relentless wail that split the stillness, its red hull a blur against the dark. Drenvar Holt gripped the wheel, his broad shoulders hunched forward, his gruff voice barking through the crackle of the radio. "Hold on, almost there. Sounds like a bad one." His hands tightened, knuckles whitening, his jaw set as he navigated the narrow roads, the weight of exhaustion pressing against his bones, a shift that had already stretched too long. Beside him, Lysara Vane sat rigid, her sharp gray eyes locked on the horizon, her lean frame tense as she clutched the tray Tavrin had thrust into her hands, the burgers and fries a lifeline resting in her lap. She shifted, her voice a low rasp. "This food, damn kid knew we'd need it. Keeps us sharp, can't fight empty." Drenvar grunted, a faint nod. "Good call. Hope he knows what he gave us." The truck screeched to a halt, tires skidding on gravel as the fire loomed, a roaring beast, its heat a wall that slammed against them as they leapt out. Flames devoured the house, the windows glowing red, the roof sagging under the onslaught. A single mother pounded at a second-story window, her toddler's cries piercing the night, the fire licking at the only exit below. Drenvar's boots hit the ground hard. "Hose now! Get it on!" His voice a thunderclap as he grabbed an axe, his broad frame charging toward the inferno. Lysara followed, her helmet glinting as she tossed the empty tray aside, the food gone, its energy surging through her like a shot of adrenaline. She tore into the fray, her sharp eyes scanning. "Up there! Window! Move!" and scaled a crumbling porch, her lean frame steady as she smashed the glass with her elbow, shards raining down as she reached in, pulling the child free, her small arms flailing against Lysara's chest. Drenvar hacked at the door, smoke choking his lungs, his gruff voice a growl. "Hang on! Gotcha!" He broke through, hauling the mother out, her sobs muffled against his shoulder as the fire roared behind them. The blaze fought back, a snarling beast, but they pressed on. Water arced from the hose, steam hissed, and Lysara cradled the child, her sharp gray eyes fierce as she stumbled back to safety, Drenvar dragging the mother clear. The house collapsed in a groan of timber, but they'd won. The meal from Tavrin a quiet strength in their veins, their hands steady as they saved 2 lives from the fire's grasp, a victory carved from exhaustion and grit. Back at the restaurant, Zephyr Kane manned the grill, his lean frame taut with a restless energy, his graying hair tied back as he flipped patties, his dark eyes clouded with a storm of memory. The manager, a man whose life had brushed fire's cruel edge, friends lost to its wrath over the years, couldn't shake the image of Tavrin's act. The boy's quick hands snatching the tray, the calm resolve of Elias Warwick and Leora Warwick as they stepped back into line, the firefighters' urgent rush. It replayed in his mind, a scene that struck deep. He'd plated Elias and Leora's reordered meal, his voice firm. "No charge. Heroes feed heroes tonight." Elias had grinned, rubbing his neck. "Thanks. Means something, really." Leora's warm hazel eyes softened. "Felt right. Glad we could help." Zephyr nodded, his chest tight, a memory flashing. His father's crew, a burger split between them before a call. Laughter cut short by a siren. The spark grew, a need to honor Tavrin's move, a boy who'd stirred something raw without knowing. At home, Tavrin stood, stacking the laundry Mara had left, her voice a soft hum as she scrubbed the soup pot. "Your dad. He'd give anything, Tav. That's you tonight. Didn't think twice." He paused, the towel in his hands trembling slightly. "Heard that siren. Sounded close, Ma. Hope they ate. Hope they're safe out there." She turned, her rough hands dripping as she leaned against the sink. "They are, because of you. You gave him strength, just like he did, steady as he was." The night stretched, the kitchen still, and Tavrin couldn't know. The meal he'd given had fueled a desperate rescue, a spark of kindness touching the lives he'd crossed, a thread weaving through the dark. On the fire line, Drenvar and Lysara slumped against the truck, their uniforms drenched, their breaths ragged as the ambulance pulled away, the mother and child safe inside. Drenvar rubbed his soot-streaked face, his gruff voice hoarse. "That food. Damn kid kept us sharp. Saved 'em." Lisara wiped sweat from her sharp gray eyes, her grin faint. Hero without a clue, owe him big. They'd fought with everything. The fire dying to embers, their hands steady, the tray's memory a quiet fuel in their bones. The night held, the danger passed, and they didn't know. Hours burned, a manager stirred, a surprise brewed. Tavrin sat again, the laundry stacked. Mara's words a soft echo. "You're him, Tav, heart and all." He smiled, a flicker of peace settling, the act a bridge to his father's shadow. He didn't hear the fire's roar fade, Drenvar and Lisara resting, the mother's sobs turning to relief, or Zephyr's quiet resolve. "Gonna find that kid. Owe him." Bedini! The stars gleamed, the night a hush, and Tavrin lingered, the kitchen warm. Unaware an hour ticked by, a manager moved, a surprise ready, a kindness born in haste, unbroken, alive. The night wrapped Brandon, Florida, in a gentle embrace, the stars faint beacons piercing the velvet dark, their light filtering through the curtains of Tavrin Kael's modest bungalow to cast soft shadows across the kitchen's worn linoleum floor. The air hung still, the distant hum of crickets a faint lullaby weaving through the quiet, the lingering scent of soup and soap mingling with the cool breath of the night slipping in through an open window. Tavrin stood at the counter, his faded cap resting beside a towering stack of folded laundry, his dark hair damp from rinsing the last of the dishes, his brown eyes tracing the familiar grain of the wood as he dried his hands on a threadbare towel. At 28, he was a delivery driver whose life moved in steady, predictable currents, days of weaving through Brandon's streets, nights of quiet routine with Mara. But tonight carried a subtle weight, a quiet pride that had settled into his bones when he'd handed his meal to the firefighters, a spark that bridged the years to the father whose memory lingered in every corner of this house, a man lost to fire's unforgiving grasp when Tavrin was too young to hold him back. Mara Thalor sat at the kitchen table, her hands folding a final towel with a practiced ease, her graying hair catching the soft glow of the lamp overhead, her rough fingers tracing the fabric as she worked. The laundry piles had dwindled, a testament to her restless energy, and she glanced at Tavrin, her voice a gentle murmur. "You're calm tonight, Tav. Still thinking about them?" He nodded, tossing the towel onto the counter as he sank into a chair across from her, his elbows resting on the table, his voice soft. "Yeah, can't shake it, Ma. That siren, it was loud, close. Hope they're safe out there. Hope that food kept 'em going." She set the towel aside, folding her arms, her eyes glistening with a warmth that carried years of shared grief. "It did. You gave 'em something, Tav. Your dad, he'd come in after a long call, grab a bite and head right back out. Never stopped to think about himself. Always about who needed him. That's you tonight. Steady as he was, heart and all." She reached across, her rough hand brushing his. "You've got his fire, quiet but strong. I see it." Tavrin's throat tightened, his fingers curling around hers, the words sinking deep. A mirror to the man he'd idolized, the father whose boots once thudded across this floor, whose quick grin and steady hands had been his world until a warehouse fire swallowed him whole. He remembered the stories Mara told, late nights, cold dinners, the way his father would ruffle his hair before dashing out, the last time he'd heard that door slam shut. Tavrin had been 9, clinging to Mara's hand as the news came, a wound she'd mended with her quiet strength and endless tales of his father's courage. He looked at her now, her eyes a soft anchor. "Hope so, Ma." Felt like he was there, pushing me to do it. Couldn't just stand there. She squeezed his hand, her voice a balm. "He was, always is, in you. You did right, Tav, steady as he was." Beyond the bungalow's walls, the night bore witness to the fire's aftermath. The smoldering ruins of a small house on Brandon's edge, its charred skeleton glowing faintly under the starlight, a testament to a battle won against the odds. Drenvar Holt and Lysara Vane slumped against their fire truck, their uniforms drenched with sweat and streaked with soot, their breaths ragged as the adrenaline ebbed from their bodies. The ambulance had pulled away, its red lights fading into the distance, carrying a mother and her toddler to safety. 2 lives snatched from the fire's jaws. Drenvar rubbed his broad shoulders, his gruff voice hoarse as he leaned against the truck's side. That damn food kept us sharp. Saved 'em. He shook his head, a faint grin cracking his weathered face. Kid's got guts, didn't even blink. Lysara, her sharp gray eyes softening, tossed the empty tray onto the truck's floor, her lean frame slumping as she wiped soot from her brow. Hero without a clue. Owe him big. That meal, it was everything tonight. They'd fought with a ferocity born of desperation. The burgers and fries Tavrin had given a spark of strength that fueled them through the heat and smoke, steadying their hands as they smashed through glass and wood to pull the pair free. Back at the restaurant, Zephyr Kael finished his shift, his lean frame weary as he scrubbed the grill, his graying hair loose from its tie, his dark eyes clouded with a storm of memory as he locked the doors behind him. The manager, a man whose life had been brushed by fire's cruel hand, friends lost to its wrath over the years, couldn't shake the weight of Tavrin's act. The boys' quick hands snatching the tray, the calm resolve of Elias Warwick and Leora Warwick as they stepped back into line, the firefighters' urgent rush. It replayed in his mind, a scene that struck deep, stirring echoes of late nights waiting for his father's crew, of meals shared before calls that ended in silence. He'd plated Elias and Leora's reordered meal with a firm, no charge, heroes feed heroes tonight. Elias had grinned, his curly hair falling into his eyes. Thanks, means something, really. Leora's warm hazel eyes had softened. Felt right. Glad we could help. Zephyr had nodded, his chest tight, but the spark grew. He grabbed a bag, stuffing it with 2 fresh burgers, a heap of fries, a note scribbled in haste. For the kid. Thanks. And drove, the night air cool against his skin, a vow to find the boy who'd moved him raw. A knock rattled the bungalow's door, sharp and unexpected in the quiet, and Tavrin frowned, glancing at Mara. Who's that? She rose, smoothing her apron. I'll see. Her steps soft as she crossed to the door and swung it open, revealing Zephyr Kael, his dark eyes glinting with purpose, the bag clutched in his hands. Tavrin Kael? He asked, his voice rough, and Mara nodded. My son, come in. Tavrin stood, his breath catching as he stepped forward. You're from the restaurant? Zephyr grinned, a faint crack in his stern facade. Zephyr Kael, saw what you did. Brought this. Food. On me. Those firefighters. They saved a mom and kid tonight. Your meal kept 'em going. Thought you should know. Tavrin's eyes widened, his knees buckling as he sank back into the chair, his voice a whisper. Saved? Really? Zephyr set the bag on the table, the scent of warm burgers wafting up. Heard it straight. They ate, fought, pulled him out of that hell. You gave him strength, saved lives without even knowing, lost friends to fire myself. Your move hit me here. He tapped his chest, his dark eyes softening. Had to thank you, felt it deep. Mara's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling as she gripped Tavrin's shoulder. Tav, you... He stared at the bag, his throat tight, his voice breaking. I just wanted 'em to eat. Didn't think it'd... Zephyr clapped his shoulder, his grip firm. You thought right. Take it, kid. Earned it. Damn well earned it. They sat, the burgers unwrapped, fries spilling across a plate, and Mara poured tea, her hands trembling. Your dad. He'd be proud, Tav. Proud as anything. Tavrin nodded, tears streaking his face as he took a bite, the warmth grounding him. Feels like he's here. Thanks, Zephyr. The manager lingered, his dark eyes soft. Saw guts in you. Same guts I saw in my crew. Had to come, couldn't not. The bungalow glowed, the food a bridge, kindness given, kindness returned, a circle closed in the quiet night. Drenvar and Lysara cleaned their gear by the truck, their voices low. Kids' food, won it for us. Drenvar grunted, his broad hands steady as he coiled a hose. Lysara grinned, wiping soot from her sharp gray eyes. Hero, without a clue, owe him big. They'd rest soon, the mother's thanks echoing. You saved us, and the meal's memory a quiet fire in their chests. Elias and Leora sat at home, their reordered meal warm on their table. Worth it. Kid started it, Elias said, his curly hair falling as he smiled at Leora. She nodded, her warm hazel eyes bright. Felt right. Glad we were there. Their hands brushed, a bond forged in that line. Tavrin's act a light they'd carry. Tavrin ate, the fries crisp, the burger rich, Mara's eyes glistening. You're him, Tav, steady as he was. He swallowed. Zephyr's note simple. Thanks, heroes feed heroes. And felt it. His father's shadow, a pride shared with Drenvar, Lysara, Elias, Leora, Zephyr. The night held, the fire a memory, and Tavrin sat, tea steaming. An hour after a meal, a manager came, a surprise given, a kindness unbroken, alive.